I mean, obviously, yeah. Everything I'm saying is easy to sit here and say it, right? It's different when you're on the field and there's a conflict, maybe an armed conflict going on, because obviously, it's easier to a certain extent to analyze and act on kind of health crisis or food security crisis where there's no armed conflict going on. But when the armed conflict is kind of the escalator of really situations that were really bad anyway, right? Poverty, poor access to food, poor access to water, etc., etc. And then it's like the armed conflict is kind of the tipping point, yeah? Because, I mean, we've seen as well, I mean, I don't want to generalize, but we've seen as well that when conflict affects kind of a more, let's say, a more robust population, they deal with it. It's different than when a conflict affects an already unstable population in terms of how their lives are, how their situation is. So obviously when you put bad on bad, it's going to be really bad. But when you put bad on a situation that was not so bad, then people recover quickly. There's all this talk about resilience and stuff like that. But I mean, that's something I would talk about, not now because I could go on for hours about that. But I think an easier way, or not maybe an easier way, maybe it's a more difficult way, what I'm suggesting is to focus on the situation. Yeah? The situation that's been generated by the adverse event, the adverse events, or the crisis. Right? But to do this, we cannot do this alone. We need to speak to the people, as I said, who are being affected by this crisis, by these adverse events, to find out how they are being affected, right? Because we can't just go in and decide what people's needs are or what people's problems are, right? Because I think we need to start with problems, no? And as I said before, if we can talk about the top 10 priorities, and okay, that's good as a guide, but I think a simpler way is to look at, okay, life-threatening through these lenses, no? Life-threatening, life-altering, right? So obviously, if we're looking at a crisis, we need to first look at, okay, what may be threatening lives and how, right? That's the first thing. Because our first responsibility is to try to do something about loss of life, if possible, right? And then there's the life-altering, right, which is kind of a step up when there's lives aren't being threatened in the immediate time, but they're being altered in a negative way, right? So if we look at a situation within the context of a crisis, and we look at these, just first of all, once you've looked at, okay, what's happening? What's the crisis here? Then you look at, okay, through the lens of life-threatening and life-altering. So you're looking through a broad lens. You're not looking through the lens of food security. You're not looking through the lens of WASH. You're not looking through any other segmented lens. You're looking at what's threatening life, what's altering life, and how, right? So I think that's, and you're speaking to people to find out how this is what they think is threatening their lives, how their lives are being altered, okay? Because sometimes we might assume certain things that once we speak to people, we realize that that's not the case, right? Particularly when it comes to people's hierarchy of problems, right? Let's try to use the word problems rather than needs, or if you want to use needs, feel free, right? But if I was to think of my needs versus my problems, I pay more attention to my problems rather than my needs, right? Because I have to deal with my problems in my life, right? So if I have a problem, I need to resolve it. As long as I'm aware that it's a problem, okay? So if somebody comes to me, and I'm making an analogy, if somebody comes to me and go, you've got that problem, and I go, what? And you need to do this, and we're going to do this for you. And I'm going, no, that's not my problem. So somebody's coming to me and telling me what my problem is, instead of me saying, this is my problem, and this is how I think it should be solved. So when you look at like humanitarian work, that's kind of what we're doing in a way, you know? We're going into like an area where there are people, diverse people, a lot of people, where there's a crisis at some part of its life cycle, and we're saying, look, these are your problems, and these are our solutions to your problems. Okay, and then we wonder sometimes why things fail. Okay, so for you as a program manager or a project coordinator, right? If you think about it, imagine someone did that to you, right? So we tend to, as people and as families, decide what our problems are, right? And what hierarchy those problems are, right? So what if I have 5 problems, yeah, I will decide which of those 5 is priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, etc., depending on how it's affecting me, obviously. The one that affects me the most is the one that I will no doubt deal with first, as long as I have the ability to act on that problem. And I think it's the same for people everywhere, right? I mean, people living in crises have the same situations, but 50 million times worse, okay? They will have their own understanding of their problems, and they will have their own understanding of how urgent different problems are. Okay, so if we don't speak to these to people affected by crisis, how are we going to understand what their hierarchy is? Because if we don't understand the hierarchy, we might start doing something for them that isn't a priority for them, right? So, you know, we and well-intentioned, of course, but they couldn't care less, yeah. And I can give you a couple of examples. I mean, one classic example is the mosquito net. As we know, distributing mosquito nets is no easy task, right? They're expensive, they're heavy, they have heavy logistics costs. How do you select the people you give them to and who not? And then most of us who have been in a situation know that if people haven't been using mosquito nets before, yeah, and they have other needs or other problems that are more urgent, like for example, they need cash, they will sell the mosquito nets. Okay, so we know that, or use them for something else, like fishing or shelter or whatever, I don't know. Yeah, but or use the mosquito net culturally if the mosquito net is supposed to be given to the newborn baby or the young baby. Sometimes because of cultural reasons it won't, it'll be used by the head of the household or the man or whatever. So the actual impact of distributing something expensive as mosquito nets may not be responding to what the people affected by the crisis see as their most urgent need. So another example is latrines. So we tend to build latrines when we put people in camps, right? Or people are put in camps, not necessarily by NGOs, but they're put in camps, right? And we do that because we know that there's a risk when there's nowhere to defecate and people are thousands and thousands of people are shoved together in small spaces in poor conditions, that it is easy for problems to emerge sanitation-wise, diarrhea, cholera, or things like that. So we try to build latrines, right? But again, that's kind of solving a problem we've generated ourselves by putting people into camps, right? And I think there's been a lot of reflection about camps in the last few years. But I mean, if we take a look at camps in Greece, Moria or the like, or other places, I mean, there's a very bad history about camps, right? It generates a lot of problems and doesn't necessarily solve any problem apart from perhaps in theory, protecting people from armed conflict. But that's debatable, right? Because what would people do if they were not in camps? So we have to be careful that also, apart from figuring out what people's hierarchy is, what's life-threatening versus what's life-altering, and being careful that our solution doesn't generate more problems for people.